Maura is widely known in real estate and to RRC. She has built a business that most agents dream of. She has spoken at just about every major event around the country and has been a highly sought after expert by associations, a multitude of local and national boards, and she's a practicing agent with her own successful business. So our goal for today's call is each and every one of you is going to get not only some tactical tips and recommendations for improving your life, but some encouragement and some perspective on where you are now and how you can improve upon any situation that you are in. So without further ado, I welcome Maura. You have the mic. The show is yours.
Thank you so much, Dave. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Welcome all. Let's see. Let me try it again. There we go. The first thing you'll notice is that my title slide is different than the title that was in the email. Don't pay any attention to that. This session gets named and renamed depending on who the client is. I'm not sure if Dave renamed this one or RRC did, but I wanted to make one quick comment going forward about the email that you got. Now, I'm a big proponent of RRC education. I love what we do as an organization, and I get the best quality referrals from RRC. I've had some great education over the years. I know I've met so many of you at conference, but I was reading these bullet points that came, you can't see it because my screen is blurred, that came with the email advertising this. And I just want to say I didn't write those. Now, the reason that I want to make sure that you know that is not because it's poorly written or there's anything wrong with it. I read some of the expectations and the objectives that were put out in the email, and I started to feel stressed. We're doing a session about reducing stress and having a more balanced, and we'll talk about that word in a minute. We'll talk about balance, balanced business. And I started to feel stressed about an objective that told me I was going to get immediate action plans. So there was a little bit of a miscommunication or a disconnect. But what I want you to focus on today is we're going to be talking about, is it possible to have balance in our businesses? If balance isn't possible, then maybe we find a different word. My past life was, I was a professional musician. I have a music degree. I met my husband doing professional music theater. And the word that I think is a little more appropriate, rather than saying that we're striving for balance, is that we're striving for harmony. We all know that there are times in this business where the business truly takes over. We have to work sometimes when we're on vacation. We need to, skip dinner with the family or, cancel our own personal plans to work with that last minute buyer who's coming in from out of town. But there are also times when your life can take over. Your life can be the main melody, and you can have to make time to focus on yourself. And I think that it's that ebb and flow of work and personal that is what most of us crave and what brought us to this business in the first place, that ability to have flexibility and harmony. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Well, so as I just said, we are in a business that can take over our lives. We wear so many hats, and we joke, right, as realtors, that we have so many hats that we wear. We're not just consultants, and we're not just negotiators, but we're marriage counselors, and we're psychologists, and we are financial planners, and we're tax advisors, with the disclaimer that we're not CPAs and we're not financial planners. But we wear all of these hats for our clients. And at the end of the day, when we've taken off all of those hats, we have very little time and energy left for ourselves. And a lot of us, if you have a significant other, if you have children, you probably find that you're expending your energy on them first too. So it's clients first, it's family first, it's kids first, it's friends and significant others. And then at the end of the day, you don't have much left in your tank for yourself. But there's a reason that when we're on an airline, they tell you that in case of emergency, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first before helping others. Because if you don't take care of yourself, and we're talking not just your physical health, but your mental health and your emotional health, and anything else that is important to you. For some of you, it might be spiritual health. For some of you, it might be some other form of self-fulfilling. If you don't take care of yourself, you're going to find less and less and less enthusiasm to take care of others. And that's quite simply called burnout. And we're going to cover burnout in a lot more detail in just a little bit. So we wear all of these hats and we have all of this time and this energy for other people. And then what does that leave for us? Not a whole lot. So let me talk to you. Let's go back in time to 2019. Now, not just because that was the year before the pandemic, but because 2019 is kind of a benchmark year for me. And in some ways, you could say it was my best year ever. I sold more houses than I ever had before. I made more money than I ever had before. I bought 2 properties. It's the first year I had ever bought 2 properties. I bought an investment property that was meant to be a vacation home for my husband and myself, as well as a short-term rental that would bring us money. And I bought a personal home and I moved, and we were thriving, except I was the most unhappy I have ever been. And what I realized by the end of that year was not only was I unhappy, but I was guilting myself about feeling unhappy, because I kept saying to myself in those private moments, what right do you have to be this unhappy? What right do you have to, with all of this money that you're making and purchasing these beautiful properties and selling homes and having clients tell you how great you are? What right do you have to be feeling the way that you do? And even worse, taking it out on your friends and family. I had all of the classic symptoms that are now known to be associated with burnout. Ironically, they're also associated with clinical depression, withdrawing, lack of appetite, not sleeping well, snapping and having short temper, finding everyday tasks really difficult to complete that would have been so easy for me before. I was totally burned out, and I was at the end of my rope to the extent that I almost quit real estate, which would have been a huge mistake because that would have been quitting something that I love for a problem that was fixable. So a few months go by and all of a sudden we're in 2020. And sure enough, the world comes to a screeching halt because of the pandemic. And it couldn't have come at a better time for me. Now, I know that there were a lot of horrible things that happened during the pandemic, and I don't want to make light of people who lost family members, people who died. A dear friend of mine here in Georgia who has become a bit of a mentor to me spent several months in the hospital, and we weren't sure if he was going to live or die. We couldn't travel to see friends and family when they were ill or when they to pay our last respects when they passed away. But it was also a time where we were forced to slow down, if not completely stop. And that's what I needed. I needed something external outside of myself that made me slow down and completely come to a halt. So those 3 weeks that we were in lockdown here in Georgia, because our governor did declare us essential. Now, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, I've apologized to you guys before when I've come and spoken for your associations. I know that this is still a bit of a sore subject. And any other state that was not named essential and that had really restrictive regulations around even continuing the practice of real estate. But we had about 3 weeks that were enforced, and then we were able to slowly work our way back in. But those 3 weeks were really great for me mentally, because I had to stop and I really had a chance to reassess. And we don't give ourselves many of those chances. As realtors, as self-employed business owners, as entrepreneurs, our speeds are go and go, go, go. And we don't often, even when we're on vacation, most of us aren't really good at truly taking a break. So 2019 was that year that I look back on as a turning point. And I had some really tough decisions to make. And how was I going to deal with this feeling of burnout? Ironically, 2019 is also the year that clinical burnout became a diagnosable malady by the DSM. Clinical psychologists and scientists decided that burnout is an actual diagnosable condition. So what does that look like? And I will share slides with you all at the end today. And absolutely, you can reach out to me if you have questions about the presentation. But here are some of the symptoms. How do you know? And I mentioned some of the ones that I was feeling. Cynicism, if you're not normally a cynical person, feeling apathetic, not caring about your work, not feeling motivated. Things that are easy or should be easy to you feel overwhelming. Even something as simple as getting out of bed in the morning. There are physical manifestations, including it can weaken your immune system. You can have unexplained aches and pains, chronic headaches. I'd never had a migraine before until the fall of 2019. And of course, you know what we do when we have something that we've never had before. We go on WebMD, and I convinced myself that I was dying. Isolating, canceling plans, not showing up to things, feeling exhausted, even if you knew that you'd slept for 8 or 10 or 12 or 14 hours, and angry, quick-tempered, easily frustrated, snapping at friends and family, and them wondering what they did wrong. So we talk about this notion of balance. But again, I'm going to say maybe balance isn't what we should be striving for. Perhaps it's more realistic and it's kinder to ourselves to admit and acknowledge that we don't have the ability to truly balance, because balance means that we're equally working and playing, right? We have equal time for our responsibilities as well as for our joy. What we should be seeking is harmony amongst those things so that we don't end up looking like I looked at the end of 2019 and feeling like I felt. So let's talk a little bit about how marketing companies, how brands want to focus on this feeling. And it's conveniently at the end of the year, because here I was at the end of what I consider my fiscal year, because I work on a January to December calendar year. And as we start to feel the stress of the holidays, and we start to feel, maybe you aren't suffering from actual burnout, but it's just some exhaustion of the year and the holidays on top of you, they come to us with this new year, new you mentality. And they start to market to us in a way that is extremely manipulative and extremely persuasive, because you're feeling at your worst. So even if you've had a great holiday season and you've enjoyed being with your family and you don't feel burned out, you've got that little bit of a come down, right? The January blues. And here we are with brands marketing to us. And it's mainly, of course, fitness and diet, because where do we manifest that feeling of blues? We manifest it in looking at ourselves and thinking that we could be better. And then we start to make resolutions. We have all these marketing messages. They start in November. It's pretty well known that they'll start marketing to you between Halloween and Thanksgiving, because now the season of eating is upon us. Regardless of your religion, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, you've got eating holidays that come to you at the end of the fall and the beginning of winter. And then we start to make resolutions to become new, better versions of ourselves. And I say, no. Why can't you be the same you and work on small improvements? But even those are hard to accomplish or to be successful with, because we make resolutions in a way that sets us up for failure. And that's what I was doing at the end of 2019. I was thinking, something's wrong with me. I don't understand why I feel this way. I should be happy. Maybe I just need to lose weight, exercise more. Maybe I'm dehydrated. I don't smoke, but I probably need to get more sleep. And the problem with resolutions is they are vague, they are unstructured, and they are not actual goals. And as Benjamin Franklin said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So it does us, I think that was Ben Franklin. No, wait, Ben Franklin said, failing to plan is planning to fail. Sorry. There's another quote, and I'll get to it later. A goal without a plan is just a wish. I'm messing up my famous people. There's a really great book that I love, and I have a list of book recommendations for you at the end of the presentation. But Elizabeth Day is a British author and journalist, and her first book was How to Fail. She also has a great podcast by the same name, and I highly recommend both the book and the podcast. What she does is she looks at our failures and she dissects them, and she makes them into positives. Failure is a necessary part of success. But here in her second book, Philosophy, she talks about New Year's resolutions failing because we live in this culture that celebrates impossible perfection. Think about all of the messages that you're bombarded with every day. Even if you don't watch television, you don't listen to the radio, and you don't get in your car and drive and see billboards or see advertising in stores. If you go onto social media, you're seeing celebrations of impossible perfection through influencers, through our friends and our families, only curating the best parts of themselves, putting online only the good things that happen to them, which makes us think, what? We're happy for them, but why don't we have that? It's a lust for the unattainable things, she says. And we are constantly motivating ourselves to reach these impossible degrees of perfection instead of honoring our imperfections and finding achievable ways to improve. So let's talk a little bit about this word resolution, and then we'll move past the New Year's resolution analogy. But I think it's important. A firm decision to do or not do something. How many of you have ever made a firm decision to lose weight, or a firm decision to eat better or exercise more? Right? I'm hoping there are a lot of hands going up, or a lot of people saying, that's me. But we're not making them measurable. We're not saying, I want to lose 20 pounds, and here are the 5 things I'm going to do that. Similarly, we say, I want to sell more houses, or I want to raise my price point, or I want to serve more clients next year. But we don't take a step back and sit down and write down the 5 things we're going to consistently do to make that happen. So we're making a wish, and we're blowing on the dandelion, or we're, pulling on a wishbone, or pinky swearing, but it's not really setting those achievable goals for ourselves. And one last thing about those resolutions, and just to give you an example, these are some statistics that the exercise and fitness industry uses against you every December and January. They know that marketing to you will account for 12% of new gym memberships by you signing up, because they marketed to you in December. 12% of all the new memberships in January accounts for 12% of the entire year. But they know that 80% of you won't make it past the 5-month mark. And that doesn't mean you're going consistently for 5 months. That means you're giving them money for 5 months, whether or not you go. 50% or more of us never go regularly. So we go once or twice, we go sporadically, we don't schedule it for ourselves. Similarly, those things that we need to do to sell more houses or make more money, we aren't scheduling those necessary, consistent activities. We're saying, I want to sell more houses. But what stresses us out, and the reason that we don't get there, is because we're not setting those consistent goals and putting them into our schedules so that they are appointments with ourselves. And the majority of us, especially if we are offered a discount to set up auto pay, we continue to pay really without us even thinking about it, because they give you that 5% discount if you agree to let them pull that money out of your account or charge your credit card every month. And then it's mindless. It just keeps happening and we forget it. So think about all that just revenue that they're making because we didn't plan well enough. We made a wish, not a goal. So how do we fix this? There we go. It was Saint-Exupéry who said, a goal without a plan is just a wish. So how do we turn those resolutions into achievable goals, but with less stress? Well, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this today, but I would highly encourage you, if you want to work smarter, not harder, but also to find more balance for yourself and more time for yourself, to take a class that's intensive on goal setting. We need to make specific goals. We need to be very clear about what we want. I don't want to lose weight. I want to lose 7 pounds. I want to lose it by the time I go to the beach on August 30th. I want it to be an attainable amount. I could lose 7 pounds by August 30th. I've got about 6 weeks. I want it to be relevant to my goals Well, it's relevant to my fitness. I think my clothes will fit better. And time-based and timely, meaning I've set that deadline for myself. So with every single thing that you want to achieve, including more harmony in your life, more time for yourself, less stress, less opportunities to go down that road of burnout, we need to be better about how we set those goals. But I'm not here to be teaching you a goal-driven class today, because unfortunately, that's what can lead us to burnout and stress, is too much emphasis on that. And really what Dave and I wanted to make sure that we talked about today is the other side of it, which is personal time, harmony, finding ways to enjoy life, the one life that we have, while also selling more houses, making more money. And in that poll in the beginning, it was interesting. I saw that the majority of you did say creating a sustainable life with time to enjoy it. And some of you did say that you want to make as much money as possible. And I think it's possible to do both. But again, if you have a plan for it. So there was a great study that came out of the Carnegie Institute of Technology, and they were talking to some of the most successful CEOs and CFOs in the country, and they were asking them what they thought led to their financial success. And 85% of them said that they put a much higher percentage of importance on emotional intelligence, what they call moral intelligence, and body intelligence. And when they compiled all of the research and all of the results, they found that only 15% of those who were interviewed and went through the study said that it was their actual knowledge, their IQ, their technical skills that led to their success. So if 85% said that their EQ, their moral intelligence, their MQ, and their BQ, their body intelligence, were the reasons that they reached the high level of success that they did, that tells us that those people are doing something right. They're finding the time to have that harmony in their lives. They're finding the time to acknowledge that maybe balance isn't a thing, but we have to be paying attention to what our bodies are telling us. We have to be paying attention to morality and integrity in the workplace. That's reputational. That means that you find less stress from having to prove yourself or to defend yourself, and that your emotional intelligence, your soft skills, your people skills are important and need to be acknowledged as well. So this is where we find our harmony. If you are physically in tune with your body, you are in tune with your emotions, and you are practicing business based in integrity and morality, which as realtors, of course, I mean, CRS, we are the top 4%. We regularly say we're the top 4% of realtors. Sometimes I even hear top 3. And as realtors, we are bound by the code of ethics. We should have that moral intelligence piece down pat. So we really need to focus on the other two. So for emotional intelligence, this is the one where we hear the most discussion about. Corporate training programs are now, over the past decade or so, have been spending a lot more time teaching emotional intelligence classes. Leadership academies at local, state, and at NAR associations are teaching classes on emotional intelligence. Leadership teams are also bringing in training on emotional intelligence. NAR's LEAD class touches on it a bit. And it's those soft skills that are what you might also refer to as people skills. So the good news is that this is something that you can constantly improve on. Scientists believe that your IQ, your intelligence quotient, is pretty much set from the age of somewhere between 5 and 7. Now, it can vary slightly with age, but by the age of 5 to 7, it's pretty much set unless you have a traumatic brain injury or some other learning disability. And that doesn't mean that you know everything you're going to know by the age of 5 or 7. It means that your capacity for learning is pretty much set. So the good news is you can, while you may not be able to change your IQ much, and there have been some studies that have shown a fluctuation of about 5 points and maybe even as many as 10, but you're not seeing substantial changes in IQ. but we can see substantial growth in emotional intelligence. Now, how does that work? Well, it's becoming more self-aware. And if you have an opportunity to take any classes on emotional intelligence, there are some really great ones that are offered for free or for a nominal cost through, I know Yale University offers one for free that's on happiness. There's a professor who actually teaches a class on happiness that centers around emotional intelligence. There are some through the platform Coursera, which is Coursera. I've taken some great courses through Coursera. Most of them are free that you can find, but it's knowing yourself. It's having self-awareness. So for example, knowing your negative triggers. What are your pet peeves? What are the things that set you off? Do you have a temper? You know, for example, if you know that it really annoys you when agents don't read your listings and they call you and they ask you stupid questions, right? If that's a pet peeve of yours and you know you're getting a new listing and you're going to put it in the MLS, maybe just mentally prepare yourself that that first day or two that listing is on the market, your phone is going to ring and people are going to ask you questions that they probably could have figured out if they read the listing in the MLS. And you might just have to, you know, drink an extra cup of coffee that day, go to a coffee shop or go to the pool and just be prepared to be in a beautiful surrounding where you're answering a bunch of dumb questions all day. Sleeping on big decisions instead of acting hastily, smiling and laughing more. This is my favorite one, as well as doing one joy-filled activity for yourself every day. And this might be one of those things that's difficult for you if you are that workaholic mentality of I need to work, 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 and constantly be on the go. You may need to schedule this for yourself in your calendar every day. And this doesn't mean doing something for someone else. It doesn't mean doing something for your spouse. It doesn't mean doing something for your kids, unless those are the things that bring you joy. But it might feel selfish in the beginning. Perhaps it's, you know, locking the bathroom door and taking that bubble bath with a glass of wine at night. Or maybe it's 30 minutes alone in silence with your coffee first thing in the morning, just listening to the birds chirp. Whatever it is, make time for it. And if you have difficulty justifying it, put it into your calendar as an appointment with yourself. And I promise you, you will start to feel the results of making time for you to do one thing every day. And that will in turn lead to you smiling and laughing more. Writing down your goals. Now, remember, we're not talking about resolutions. We're making them specific. We're making them measurable. We're putting a deadline on things, but sharing them and share them with a relevant person. Maybe you share your real estate goals with your broker or your business partner or your accountability partner who's a friend who lives across the country. Maybe you share your fitness goals with your best friend, or you hire a personal trainer to keep you accountable, or your spouse. My big goal this year was to run the Boston Marathon. And I had to quite literally put my money where my mouth was, because I will never qualify to run the Boston Marathon in the required 3 hour and 12-minute time, which is what's needed for my age group. But so I got a charity bib and I committed to raising $10,000. And if I didn't raise the money, I would have to pay the money. And I shared that goal on social media. I shared it with all of you. If you're my Facebook friend, I shared it not only because I was trying to raise the money, but also because I knew I needed people asking me every time they saw me, or, you know, commenting on my posts. I needed that encouragement. I needed the accountability. So if you're brave enough, and I was only brave because I needed to raise that money, but if you're brave enough, share it publicly. If you have a big, scary goal and you truly want to be held accountable, bite the bullet and, you know, jump in the deep end and share it with the world. But share with someone so that they can, even if you don't want to share it publicly, share it with someone so they can be your biggest cheerleader. This one was a little strange to me. I took a class on emotional intelligence more than a decade ago when this one came up, creating a patterning journal to track your ups and downs. And to me, that felt a little touchy-feely. I wasn't feeling it. I thought it sounded a little strange, and I put it away and I didn't touch it until 2019. And then as I was trying to work through what the heck was going wrong in my life, beginning of 2020, I started doing just little bullet points in my calendar in my phone. And, or if you've ever heard Tommy Choi speak, Tommy Choi from Chicago, he talks about a gratitude journal. And that's another version of this. If you have trouble finding 3 things every day that you're grateful for, you might need a little bit of a reset on that harmony, right? I was noticing that I was having trouble tracking joy. I was only tracking the things I was frustrated about or disappointed about, and it was looking pretty grim in my bullet points on those days when I was consistently not doing that thing for myself every day. I was, if I missed, going out and putting my headphones in and going for a run, or taking that bath, or having 30 minutes just to read a novel or watch some silly, mindless television just all by myself, just to have that quiet time. That when I was skipping out that just 30 minutes to give to yourself every day, I was seeing that I was having more and more trouble finding something that went well that day, because I was focusing more on the negatives. So that patterning journal turned out to not be such a bad idea after all. So if you think that sounds a little silly to have a journal, if it feels like you're a middle schooler and you're, writing Dear Diary in your little diary with the little lock and key, and it feels immature or not quite like you, maybe give it a try anyway and find a way to make it work for yourself. Bullet points, bullet journals have gotten very popular these days. Google that and see if that appeals to you, but just somewhere where you're tracking gratitude and joy, as well as the things that are frustrating, because those give you things to work on. And then, of course, the most obvious one, which is training yourself to accept difficult situations as learning opportunities rather than threats to your success. We're going to talk about failure in a minute, but this is the most obvious one, but it can be the hardest one to do, especially if you're already sort of feeling burned out. Dave and I did this webinar a couple of weeks ago, and I had about a half a dozen people reach out to me in the week or so afterwards saying that they had gone through something similar and they'd never talked to anybody about it because it was embarrassing, because they had had a great year, but they felt terrible, or they felt guilty. They felt like it was, hashtag first world problems. So it really is a mindset shift that we need to embark upon, but that can be difficult because once you find yourself feeling that way, it's hard to find the way to dig yourself out. And it can be something that you really don't feel comfortable sharing with anyone else. And even when you do share it, they don't really know what to say because it feels very personal. And, my husband and I've talked about it several times since, and he said, I wanted to help you, but I didn't know what you needed. And you couldn't tell me what you needed either. So we were just kind of at an impasse. So that's a few things about emotional intelligence. Now, if you Google emotional intelligence, you will find pages and pages and pages of search results on Google. My biggest recommendation is to find a great class about it. The other great resource for me has been the Harvard Business Review. It's the best $120 I spend every year. And you get the magazine 6 times a year and access to all of their archives. And there are some really, really great educational articles on everything business, from leadership to emotional intelligence to finance and economics. But they're really great, well-written, well-researched articles. And there's a ton in their archives that could be very useful as well. So let's talk about body intelligence. We live in a country that hasn't paid great attention to our bodies until maybe about the last decade. We keep trying to have these fitness revolutions, right? I mean, I think about when I was a kid, Olivia Newton-John in her purple pastel leotard, and we go through the Jane Fonda craze, and we had the kickboxing craze, and we have Zumba, and we have jazzercise. But when we fall into those fads and we fall into those fitness trends, are we really paying attention to our bodies? So how can we be better? Because your physical health, if it's 1/3 of that harmony that we need between our moral, our emotional, and our body intelligence. And it's the only body that we have. What can we be doing to better improve our body intelligence? Having a healthy body is the thing that allows you to be mobile and enjoy in whatever capacity that means for you, and enjoy life and enjoy the time that you have. So it's acknowledging that sleep is important. So many studies lately talk about the importance of sleep. I used to be a big believer that I could get a whole lot done on very little sleep. You know, I suffered from terrible insomnia, which I think stemmed out of graduate school and staying up all night and you know, grading papers and working on papers and not sleeping well and going out too much. I'm a big in bed by 8:30 or 9 o'clock now person. I never thought I would be a morning person, but here we are all of a sudden. You know, my husband gets up at 4:30 to work out and he's rubbed off on me a little bit. So I'm up at 5, have my coffee. You can shift your sleep patterns, and you can, now, if you have small children, I understand that you are at their mercy for at least a little while, but finding a way to prioritize sleep. The other thing that's scary to me is Alzheimer's runs in my family on both sides, and lack of sleep has been linked to a greater chance of developing Alzheimer's, especially if you're genetically prone to it. So I'm a big protector of my sleep now. There have been a lot of studies that have shown us that we should not be looking at these pesky screens, including your television, but also your laptop, your tablet, your desktop, your Kindle, your phone, 30 minutes before sleep. But now what they're telling us is the first 30 minutes in the morning that you wake up, you also shouldn't have those screens in your face. We're not giving our brains a chance to properly power down at night. And similarly, we're waking them up too early and too harshly with blue light. They're actually doing studies where it shows that it's reconfiguring the way that your brain works in the morning. And that's a little scary, that we're rewiring our brains through our exaggerated use of technology. So even if you're like me and this sucker is your alarm clock and your email and your entertainment and everything, finding a way that the first 30 minutes in the morning, you just stay away from it if you can. And maybe you can't do that every morning. Maybe there are some mornings where you have to hit the ground running and grab your phone because you're waiting for an important email, but to the best that you can control it, not having that blue light first thing in the morning, getting sunshine and fresh air. You know, vitamin D is proven to be so important. If you live in a place where you get increasingly less and less sun during the fall and winter months, invest in one of those sunlight imitators on Amazon. They have these great lights that you can sit in front of that give you an artificial version of vitamin D, but it very closely resembles the same thing. I was telling Dave before we started, I'm really excited that our vacation in a couple of weeks is we're going to Norway. We're going to this island that's 3.5 hours north. It's a flight 3.5 hours north of the mainland of Norway. And it's going to be midnight sun. It's going to be 24 hours of sunlight the entire time we're there, which I've never experienced. And I know some of you, if you're in Alaska or in the extreme north, you have, but that's, while it seems very strange to me, I'm kind of excited to experience that. Getting some physical activity, thinking about food sensitivity. I know there's a lot of companies now. I know Everlywell is one of them. I've actually done their food sensitivity test. They send it to you. You know, give them some samples of saliva and blood, and then you send it back and they give you a report. It's kind of like those ancestry tests. But if you think that you might have a food sensitivity, that can absolutely affect all of this. Moderation with alcohol, of course, and listening to the messages. Your body will tell you when you need to slow down, but most of us aren't very good at listening to it. And then finally, even if you are doctor averse, if you truly are having those physical symptoms, those migraines were coming on fast and furious for me in 2019. I finally did go to the doctor, and I was reluctant to be prescribed a migraine medication, but I took it just in case because they were debilitating. I mean, I accepted the prescription I think I might have only taken it once or twice because I tend to be a little medication averse, but knowing that I had it for those extreme times of discomfort and pain it was good to know. And I waited too long before I went because I really was worried that there was something more seriously wrong. And then, of course, moral intelligence. We've talked about this. If we're the top 3 or 4% of realtors and we have our code of ethics, but knowing your core values, there's a great video. If you look on YouTube, zappos.com has a great video about their business core values. And I use that a lot when I teach customer service. Practicing gratitude, Tommy Choi has that gratitude journal. Limiting your social media exposure. There's another great British journalist I love. Her name is Emma Gannon, and she wrote a book called The Multi-Life. And she talks about social media as being compare and despair. It's looking at those beautifully curated lives of everyone from your best friends and your colleagues to celebrities. And we only see the best of people. We don't see the struggles they face every day. And it makes us think that they're doing something right that we're not. And we need to limit that exposure, especially if you are not doing so well with finding that harmony right now. Limiting multitasking or stopping it altogether, because we are not built to be multitaskers. We will complete tasks at a subpar level if we're trying to complete more than one at a time. Whereas if we focus on one and we complete it and we can move on to the next, we'll do a much better job. So think about that not only when you're serving your clients, but also think about it when you're doing something for yourself. Don't try to get that 30 minutes of joy. Don't go out for a walk on a beautiful nature trail and take business calls. That's not your 30 minutes. You just threw your 30 minutes away. You got to start over. And make sure that if you're ending the day, especially if it was a frustrating day, you're ending it on a positive note. Find something to make it so that you're not going to bed feeling that the day was a disaster. And remember to create your own version of success. Now, look back at 2019. I was the number one team in my office that year. I haven't been the number one team since, and I am A-okay with that. I redefined what my goals were, and I redefined my version of success. And my husband and I decided that what success looked like for us. It's buying investment properties. It's the ability to take one really phenomenal vacation every year. It's the ability to pay for our sweet geriatric dogs' medical care and make sure we give them the best life possible because we don't have children. And it's finding time not only for ourselves to have that personal time to do the things that bring us joy, but also for me to have the luxury to be a volunteer at my local, state, and national association, because those are things that bring me joy, even sometimes when it's a little stressful. But giving back to the industry is important to me. And I separate that from my personal enjoyment, but it's something else that I wanted the luxury to do. And in order to do a lot of those things, I needed to not work 24/7. And I'm a lot happier for it. So let's talk a little bit about failure, because I was having a conversation around the beginning of 2021 with a broker in my market area. And I was talking about, my second year of decreasing sales. And he looked me right in the eye and he said, "Doesn't that feel like failure?" First of all, if you're creating your own definition of success, then selling less isn't failure. Selling less is a choice. Now, are there times when there's a deal I wish I'd gotten or a multiple offer situation I wish I'd won? Sure. Is it always in my control? Of course not. But what about the times when we truly do have failure? And what do we do with that feeling? What do we do with feeling like we failed? And I think what we do is we embrace it. So why? Well, failure comes in all shapes and sizes, and you can choose how it impacts you. So, for example, Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times before he created the version of the light bulb that we have today. He didn't look at those as failed attempts. He looked at them as learning opportunities, ways to improve the invention, ways to make it into what he knew it could be. We don't focus on the number of times that Babe Ruth struck out, which outnumber the number of times he hit a home run. But his phenomenal number of successes, even though it's so much smaller than his number of perceived failures, is what made him what we know of today as, one of the greatest baseball players of all time. If Steve Jobs and Bill Gates hadn't failed at their attempts at technology, had learned from them and kept going, we wouldn't probably be meeting right now, 200 or 105 of us on Zoom right now through our devices, having a meeting. So we have to look at failure as a mindset, and it's only the way that you react to it and not letting it control you and not letting someone else's idea of failure affect your reaction. The broker, who is a great friend of mine, and I don't think that he meant anything by it, I think he thought he was being supportive. Like, doesn't that feel like failure? Maybe I can help you with that. And when I explained to him about what happened in 2019, he was like, oh, so you're actually feeling good about fewer sales. But he was taking his definition of success as a broker who's not an active seller, who is used to his agents coming to him and saying, I need to figure out a way to get out of this slump. He was using that definition for his perception of what I was saying. And we don't need to use someone else's definition of success. And it's also not thinking about failure as the enemy of success. It's a stepping stone. But failure does have an enemy, and that enemy is resilience. That enemy is persistence. So you can defeat failure even when it creeps up on you and it threatens to undermine you by bouncing back. And maybe you do have a failure that causes you to have a moment that you need to grieve, or you need to feel a little bit down just to deal with it. That's great. But when you find a way to come back bigger and better and stronger and with more knowledge than before, you've beaten that failure and you've learned from it, and you've taken one more step toward a better success. And I also want to talk for a minute about, this is one of my favorite subjects, which is quitting versus giving up. And we have this culture in our country around the feeling of, quitters never win and winners never quit. And I would urge you, if you're changing your mindset around balance versus harmony, and you're changing your mindset around failure, I would urge you to change your mindset around quitting, because quitting is sometimes something that's necessary for your mental health. You may need to quit a client who doesn't treat you well. You may need to quit an activity that isn't healthy for you. Maybe you might need to quit a group of friends who you don't gel with anymore from a values perspective. A very good friend of mine had actually qualified, unlike me. I told you I'm slow. She qualified to run the Boston Marathon back in 2017 or 2018. She's a phenomenal runner. She's done a ton of marathons and half marathons and all kinds of, running. She's been running since she was a kid, whereas I didn't start till I was 41. And she was so excited, and she was sharing it on social media that she was running the Boston Marathon, and she was sharing her training regimen, and we were all supporting her. And she got to Boston and got her bib, and it's the morning of the race, and she's excited, and she posted a video, and the race began, and we were all following along. And around mile 11, something didn't feel quite right. And around mile 13, she really started to be in some serious pain. And around mile 17, she realized that she needed to quit. Her body was telling her that she could not keep going. And I remember her message that evening, and I have goosebumps. I always get goosebumps telling the story. I remember her message that evening on social media, apologizing that she'd let us all down. We were her supporters, and she'd let us down because she quit. Well, she quit because she physically had to stop, or she could have seriously injured herself. But she didn't give up because she kept running. She let her body rest and heal. She started to train again. She ran it the next year, and she completed the race. Giving up is different, though. Giving up is a defensive move. Giving up is taking your toys and going home from the sandbox because your feelings are hurt, or you're not willing to try anymore. So if there's something that isn't making you happy, or there's something that isn't fulfilling you, or the ROI isn't there from a time, a money, or an energy perspective, don't feel like you can't quit, because we're from a society that teaches us that quitting is bad. Quitting is healthy. Giving up without giving it a fair shake may not be the best thing, but quitting is actually a healthy activity. And as we're starting to wrap up, I know Dave wanted to do some Q&A, and I'm sorry I get a little long-winded. I wanted to just mention there was a study by a Swedish scientist in 2018 that was about factfulness. And he found that focusing on long-term progress is actually good for your mental health. So when you're setting those goals, and maybe the goal is more harmony, right? Maybe the goal is greater success with less effort, right? Working smarter, not harder. But focusing on small victories along the way will actually make you more motivated to keep going. And it will also make the ultimate destination, right? It's celebrating the journey, so that when you get to the end point, when you meet the goal, the big goal, it's more of a celebration, because you've allowed yourself to stop and recognize your progress along the way. And then the last thing I want to mention is, for those of you who know me, or if we're friends on social media, or you follow my Instagram, you know that I'm a little bit of a baker, and I love baking. I love cakes. But there's this thing in baking called the Maillard reaction. And it's a chemical reaction that happens in cooking in general, but especially in baking. But for example, when you take a lump of sourdough dough and you put it in the oven, and it turns into this beautiful crusty bread that's, soft and beautiful on the inside, and crisp and crusty on the outside. Or when you bake a pie, and that pie crust goes from a dough, and you sprinkle sugar on top of it, and it's this crunchy, flaky, sugary, golden goodness, right? Or the coffee beans, when they're green and they're just harvested, they're not edible, and they're not going to give you anything delicious. But once they roast them through a variety of processes, you come up with this bean that you can turn into coffee when you grind it and roast and brew it. Or even if you're roasting marshmallows and you're making s'mores, it's what turns that gooey marshmallow into that beautiful crisp, whether you like them very lightly golden or all the way to charred. That's the Maillard reaction. So when we think about factfulness, that 2018 study of celebrating small steps of progress along the way, if you're working towards something, maybe you're working toward greater harmony between your personal life and enjoyment of your life, and having to work and wanting to make money, or you're working toward better systems in your business, which Dave and I are going to do a little bit of a quick Q&A about RealVolve. But one of the reasons that I'm able to do more in my business and find more time for myself is using Dave's platform, RealVolve, and he's not paying me to say this. I've said this for years in classes before we partnered for this webinar. Being able to automate things, but not just like any CRM does, but intuitively, with an if this then that system built in, means that some things I can set to auto send, some things are intuitive. So I click a button and I make a choice, and then it goes in, when we finish the appraisal contingency, this goes out. If the appraisal came in low, then this goes out. And the workflows are fluid and flexible with what's going on. I'm not spending more time in my business, having to rewrite email after email. But regardless of what you're working on, make sure that you're celebrating the transformation, because that's the piece that will keep you motivated. Those small steps along the way that are your little victories that are allowing you to chip away at those goals, but in a healthy way, and making sure to make time for yourself. So as I promised, here is a link to a resource page. This full disclosure, this link is a very, very, very short survey. But once you complete the survey and hit submit, it will give you a link to please bookmark with resources for this class, a bunch of follow-up reading, book recommendations, videos, You'll have the opportunity if you'd like to join my email newsletter that goes out once a month usually. And it's no listings or open houses or anything, just interesting articles and reading. And if you'd like to join it, that would be great. And that's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maura. So everyone, I've known Maura a long time, and I've been doing webinars for years now. And every now and then I come across one that I share with my family. And this was one. There was just such important life lessons in there. And what really struck me was the recipe to set that foundation for you to accomplish your goals, the moral, emotional, and physical IQ. And I'm curious, Maura, out of everyone that you have worked with, and because if you look at those three pillars, it could seem overwhelming, like I got to do work in all these three areas, where myself, I have found if I just focus on one, the other two naturally dovetail in. Is that an okay approach?
I think so. And I think there's usually one that we're inherently stronger at anyway. I think, I mean, I think there's one that everyone who it was on here today might have already checked a box, right? Like, oh, I do a gratitude journal and I'm a firm believer in the code of ethics and I feel like my moral compass is great, but I really need to work on some of the other stuff. I don't listen to my body, or I do work too hard, or I don't get enough exercise. So I feel like, yes, if you probably already have one that's pretty much in place, and then you pick the one that you really want to focus on first. And I do feel like some of the other things just fall into place because it's a natural progression.
Yeah. So I was an agent, team lead, and a broker for 20 years. And I went through what Maura went through. I remember the buzz, the high of being a top performer, and how I'd feel deep down with every single transaction. But what I learned is, people often mistake these highs for happiness. Highs are short-lived and intense. Happiness is long-lived and calming. It's like that pleasant background music to everything else that we do in life. And to do that, we need to orchestrate what you're talking about, orchestrating our days that rely less on discipline and more on systems and processes. And that's really what represents the philosophy and purpose of RealVolve. Who would you say that we're best suited for, and how we help the most, Maura?
I had a small team for a little while in 2017, 18, and into 19. And it was helpful for me to be able to set up some things for my assistant to do and to delegate out. But it's just as helpful for me, if not more so, as I guess I'm a solo agent. My husband is my business partner, but we're really two solo agents who we work as one. So the intuitiveness of the platform is really helpful. And I tell people all the time that it was developed by a real estate agent, which is why I think it has more of the features and what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, just that scalability to be
that I'm
just
looking for.
that ecosystem for all of your information. Sam, I know we have a final slide. We normally do some great bonus workflows for the RRC group, but we're also going to do an extra $200 off our annual subscription and some big savings on some optional workflow consulting as well. So again, if you are an agent who really wants to graduate into prioritizing the sustainability in your business, if you want to an assured, if not slower, path to success and well-being, we are that software partner for you. So a couple final questions here, and happy to take some Q&A in the the chat, but here's some basic information on how, a next step that you can take with us, and we'd love to chat with you and show you more.
And let me just say really quickly, sign up. If you don't know much about RealVolve or you're even just a little bit curious, do sign up to have a conversation with one of their staff. It's the least pushy sales pitch I've ever heard. They're actually more interested in helping you than they are selling you, which I find to be really, we are, unfortunately, as entrepreneurs and business owners, we get sold to all the time. I mean, how many of you ignore phone calls every day because your phone tells you it's a telemarketer or it's spam? And even when they happen to make it through, it wastes a portion of your day. I've never had a salesy experience from RealVolve. So don't be afraid to say, please do call me and get some information from them, because I think that you'll be glad that even if you decide not to go with them, find out the information and have a conversation, because you're not going to get sold to, you're going to get a consultation.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Maura, for the wisdom that you've passed on to everyone. I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, evening, weekend, and we will see you next time.
Thank
Bye,
you so
everyone.
much. Bye-bye.